An excerpt from The Golden Ass by Apuleius, Book 4, The Tale of Cupid and Psyche. In a certain city there lived a king and queen with 3 notably beautiful daughters. The 2 elder ones were very attractive, yet praise appropriate to humans was thought sufficient for their fame. But the beauty of the youngest girl was so special and distinguished that our poverty of human language could not describe or even adequately praise it. In consequence, many of her fellow citizens and hordes of foreigners, on hearing the report of this matchless prodigy, gathered in ecstatic crowds. They were dumbstruck with admiration at her peerless beauty. They would press their hands to their lips, with the forefinger resting on the upright thumb, and revere her with devoted worship as if she were none other than Venus herself. Rumor had already spread through the nearest cities and bordering territories that the goddess, who was sprung from the dark blue depths of the sea and was nurtured by the foam from the frothing waves, was now bestowing the favor of her divinity among random gatherings of common folk, or at any rate that the earth rather than the sea was newly impregnated by heavenly seed and had sprouted forth a second Venus, invested with the bloom of virginity. This belief grew every day beyond measure. The story now became widespread. It swept through the neighboring islands, through tracts of the mainland and numerous provinces. Many made long overland journeys and traveled over the deepest courses of the sea as they flocked to set eyes on this famed cynosure of their age. No one took ship for Paphos, Cnidos, or even Cythera to catch sight of the goddess Venus. Sacrifices in those places were postponed. Shrines grew unsightly, couches became threadbare, rites went unperformed. The statues were not garlanded, and the altars were bare and grimy with cold ashes. It was the girl who was entreated in prayers. People gazed on that girl's human countenance when appeasing the divine will of the mighty goddess. When the maiden emerged in the mornings, they sought from her the favor of the absent Venus. With sacrificial victims and sacred feasts, the people crowded round her with wreaths and flowers to address their prayers as she made her way through the streets. Since divine honors were being diverted in this excessive way to the worship of a mortal girl, the anger of the true Venus was fiercely kindled. She could not control her irritation. She tossed her head, let out a deep growl, and spoke in soliloquy. Here am I, the ancient mother of the universe, the founding creator of the elements, the Venus that tends the entire world, compelled to share the glory of my majesty with a mortal maiden, so that my name, which has its niche in heaven, is degraded by the foulness of the earth below. Am I then to share with another the supplications to my divine power? Am I to endure vague adoration by proxy, allowing a mortal girl to strut around posing as my double? What a waste of effort it was for the shepherd, whose justice and honesty won the approval of the great Jupiter, to reckon my matchless beauty superior to that of those great goddesses. But this girl, whoever she is not going to enjoy appropriating the honors that are mine. I shall soon ensure that she rues the beauty which is not hers by rights. She at once summoned her son, that winged, most indiscreet youth, whose own bad habits show his disregard for public morality. He goes rampaging through people's houses at night, armed with his torch and arrows, undermining the marriages of all. He gets away scot-free with this disgraceful behavior, and nothing that he does is worthwhile. His own nature made him excessively wanton, but he was further roused by his mother's words. She took him along to that city and showed him Psyche in the flesh. That was the girl's name. She told him the whole story of their rivalry in beauty, and grumbling and growling with displeasure, she added, I beg you, by the bond of a mother's affection, by the sweet wounds which your darts inflict, and the honeyed blisters left by this torch of yours, ensure that your mother gets her full revenge, and punish harshly this girl's arrogant beauty. Be willing to perform this single service, which will compensate for all that has gone before. See that the girl is seized with consuming passion for the lowest possible specimen of humanity, for one who, as the victim of fortune, has lost status, inheritance, and security, a man so disreputable that nowhere in the world can he find an equal in wretchedness." With these words she kissed her son long and hungrily with parted lips. Then she made for the nearest shore, lapped by the waves. With rosy feet she mounted the surface of the rippling waters, and lo and behold, the bright surface of the sea depths was becalmed. At her first intimation, her retinue in the deep performed her wishes so promptly indeed that she seemed to have issued instructions long before. Nereus's daughters appeared in singing chorus, and shaggy Portunus, sporting his blue-green beard, and Salacia, the folds of her garment sagging with fish, and Palaemon, the elf charioteer, on his dolphin. Bands of Tritons sported here and there on the waters, one softly blowing on his echoing shell, another fending off with silk parasol the heat of the hostile sun, a third holding a mirror before his mistress's face, while others, yoked in pairs to her chariot, swam below. This was the host of Venus's companions as she made for the ocean. Meanwhile, Psyche, for all her striking beauty, gained no reward for her ravishing looks. She was the object of all eyes, and her praise was on everyone's lips, but no king or prince or even commoner courted her to seek her hand. All admired her godlike appearance, but the admiration was such as is accorded to an exquisitely carved statue. For some time now her two elder sisters had been betrothed to royal suitors and contracted splendid marriages, though their more modest beauty had won no widespread acclaim. But Psyche remained at home unattached, lamenting her isolated loneliness. Sick in body and wounded at heart, she loathed her beauty, which the whole world admired. For this reason the father of that ill-starred girl was a picture of misery, for he suspected that the gods were hostile, and he feared their anger. He sought the advice of the most ancient oracle of the Milesian gods, and with prayers and sacrificial victims begged from that mighty deity a marriage and a husband for that slighted maiden. Apollo, an Ionian Greek, framed his response in Latin to accommodate the author of this Milesian tale. "Adorn this girl, O king, for wedlock dread, and set her on a lofty mountain rock. Renounce all hope that one of mortal stock can be your son-in-law, for she shall wed a fierce, barbaric, snake-like monster. He flitted on wings aloft, makes all things smart, plaguing each moving thing with torch and dart. Why, Jupiter himself must fearful be, the other gods for him their terrors show, the rivers shudder and the dark realms below." The king had formerly enjoyed a happy life, but on hearing this venerable prophecy he returned home reluctant and mournful. He unfolded to his wife the injunctions of that ominous oracle, and grief, tears, and lamentations prevailed for several days. But now the grim fulfillment of the dread oracle loomed over them. Now they laid out the trappings for the marriage of that ill-starred girl with death. Now the flames of the nuptial torch flickered dimly beneath the sooty ashes. The high note of the wedding flute sank into the plaintive Lydian mode, and the joyous marriage hymn tailed away into mournful wailing. The bride-to-be dried her tears on her very bridal veil. Lamentation for the harsh fate of that anguished household spread throughout the city, and a cessation of business was announced, which reflected the public grief. But the warnings of heaven were to be obeyed, and unhappy Psyche's presence was demanded for her appointed punishment. So amidst intense grief of the ritual of that marriage with death was solemnized, and the entire populace escorted her living corpse as Psyche tearfully attended, not her marriage, but her funeral. But when her sad parents, prostrated by the monstrous misfortune, drew back from the performance of their monstrous task, their daughter herself admonished them with these words: "Why do you rack your sad old age with protracted weeping? Or why do you weary your life's breath, which is dearer to me than to yourselves, with repeated lamentations? Why do you disfigure those features which I adore with ineffectual tears? Why do you grieve my eyes by torturing your own? Why do you tear at your gray locks? Why do you beat those breasts so sacred to me? What fine reward by peerless beauty will bring you? All too late you experience the mortal wounds inflicted by impious envy, that grief, those tears, that lamentation for me as one already lost, should have been awakened when nations and communities brought me fame with divine honors, when with one voice they greeted me as the new Venus. Only now do I realize and see that my one undoing has been the title of Venus bestowed on me. Escort me and set me on the rock to which fate has consigned me. I hasten to embark on this blessed marriage. I hasten to behold this noble husband of mine. Why should I postpone or shrink from the arrival of the person born for the destruction of the whole world? After this utterance, the maiden fell silent, and with resolute steps she now attached herself to the escorting procession of citizens. They made their way to the appointed rock set on a lofty mountain, and when they had installed the girl on its peak, they all abandoned her there. They left behind the marriage torches, which had lighted their way but were now doused with their tears, and with bent heads made their way homeward. The girl's unhappy parents, worn out by this signal calamity, enclosed themselves in the gloom of their shuttered house, and surrendered themselves to a life of perpetual darkness. But as Psyche wept in fear and trembling on that rocky eminence, the zephyr's kindly breeze with its soft stirring wafted the hem of her dress this way and that, and made its folds billow out. He gradually drew her aloft, and with tranquil breath bore her slowly downward. She glided down over the sloping side of that high cliff, and he laid her down in the bosom of the flower-decked turf in the valley below. Book 5, Cupid and Psyche continued. In that soft and grassy arbor, Psyche reclined gratefully on the couch of the dew-laden turf. The great upheaval oppressing her mind had subsided, and she enjoyed pleasant repose. After sleeping long enough to feel refreshed, she got up with carefree heart. Before her eyes was a grove planted with towering, spreading trees, and a rill glistening with glassy waters. At the center of the grove, close to the gliding stream, was a royal palace, the work not of human hands, but of divine craftsmanship. You would know as soon as you entered that you were viewing the bright and attractive retreat of some god. The high ceiling, artistically paneled with citron wood and ivory, was supported on golden columns. The entire walls were worked in silver in relief. Beasts and wild cattle met the gaze of those who entered there. The one who shaped all this silver into animal forms was certainly a genius, or rather he must have been a demigod or even a god. The floors, too, extended with different pictures, formed by mosaics of precious stones. Twice blessed indeed, and more than twice blessed, are those whose feet walk on gems and jewels. The other areas of the dwelling, too, in all its length and breadth, were incalculably costly. All the walls shimmered with their native gleam of solid gold, so that if the sun refused to shine, the house created its own daylight. The rooms, the colonnade, the very doors also shone brilliantly. The other riches likewise reflected the splendor of the mansion. Who would be justified in thinking that this, or you would be justified in thinking that this, was a heavenly palace fashioned for mighty Jupiter when he was engaged in dealings with men? Psyche, enticed by the charming appearance of these surroundings, drew nearer, and as her assurance grew, she crossed the threshold, delighted at the surpassing beauty of the scene, encouraged to examine every detail. Her eyes lit upon storerooms built high on the other side of the house. They were crammed with abundance of treasures. Nothing imaginable was missing, and what was especially startling, apart from the breathtaking abundance of such riches, was the fact that this treasure house had no protection whatever by way of chain or bar or guard. As she gazed on all this with the greatest rapture, a disembodied voice addressed her. "Why, my lady, do you gaze open-mouthed at this parade of wealth? All these things are yours, so retire to your room, relieve your weariness on your bed, and take a bath at your leisure. The voices you hear are those of your handmaidens, and we will diligently attend to your needs. Once you have completed your toilet, a royal feast will at once be laid before you." Psyche felt a blessed assurance beyond being bestowed upon her by heaven's provisions, she heeded the suggestions of the disembodied voice, and after first taking a nap and then a bath to dispel her fatigue, she at once noticed a semicircular couch and table close at hand. The dishes laid for dinner gave her to understand that all was set for her refreshment, so she gladly reclined there. Immediately wine as delicious as nectar and various plates of food were placed before her, brought not by human hands, but unsupported on a gust of wind. She could see no living soul, and merely heard words emerging from thin air. Her serving maids were merely voices. When she had enjoyed the rich feast, a singer entered and performed unseen, while another musician strummed a lyre which was likewise invisible. Then the harmonious voices of a tuneful choir struck her ear, so that it was clear that a choral group was in attendance, though no person could be seen. The pleasant entertainment came to an end, and the advent of darkness induced Psyche to retire to bed. When the night was well advanced, a genial sound met her ears. Since she was utterly alone, she trembled and shuddered in fear for her virginity, and she dreaded the unknown presence more than any other menace. But now her unknown bridegroom arrived and climbed into the bed. He made Psyche his wife, and swiftly departed before dawn broke. At once the voices in attendance at her bedchamber tended the new bride's violated virginity. These visits continued over a long period, and this new life in the course of nature became delightful to Psyche as she grew accustomed to it. Hearing that unidentified voice consoled her loneliness. Meanwhile, her parents were aging in unceasing grief and melancholy. As the news spread wider, her elder sisters learned the whole story. In their sadness and grief, they vied with each other in hastily leaving home and making straight for their parents, to see them and discuss the matter with them. That night, Psyche's husband, he was invisible to her, but she could touch and hear him, said to her, "Sweetest Psyche, fond wife that you are, fortune grows more savage and threatens you with mortal danger. I charge you, show greater circumspection. Your sisters are worried at the rumors that you are dead, and presently they will come to this rock to search for traces of you. Should you chance to hear their cries of grief, you are not to respond or even to set eyes on them. Otherwise, you will cause me the most painful affliction and bring utter destruction on yourself." Psyche consented and promised to follow her husband's guidance, but when he had vanished in company with the darkness, the poor girl spent the whole day crying and beating her breast. She kept repeating that now all was up with her, for here she was confined and enclosed in that blessed prison, bereft of conversation with human beings for company, unable even to offer consoling relief to her sisters as they grieved for her, and not allowed even to catch a glimpse of them. No ablutions, food, or other relaxation made her feel better, and she retired to sleep in floods of tears. At that moment her husband came to bed somewhat earlier than usual. She was still weeping, and he embraced her. He remonstrated her with this: "Is this how the promise you made to me has turned out, Psyche, my dear? What is your husband to expect or to hope from you? You never stop torturing yourself night and day, even when we embrace each other as husband and wife. Very well, have it your own way. Follow your own hell-bound inclination. But when you begin to repent at leisure, remember the sober warning which I gave you." Then Psyche, with prayers and threats of her impending death, forced her husband to yield to her longing to see her sisters, to relieve their grief, and he also allowed her to present them with whatever pieces of gold or jewelry she chose. But he kept deterring her with repeated warnings from being ever induced by the baleful prompting of her sisters to discover her husband's appearance. She must not, through sacrilegious curiosity, tumble headlong from the lofty height of her happy fortune, and forfeit thereafter his embrace. She thanked her husband, and with spirits soaring, she said, "But I would rather die 100 times than forego the supreme joy of my marriage with you. For I love and cherish you passionately, whoever you are, as much as my own life, and I value you higher than Cupid himself. But one further concession I beg for my prayers. Bid your servant, the Zephyr, spirit my sisters down to me, as he earlier wafted me down. She pressed seductive kisses on him, whispered honeyed words, and snuggled close to soften him. She added endearments to her charms. "Oh, my honey-sweet darling husband, light of your Psyche's life." Her husband unwillingly gave way before the forceful pressure of these impassioned whispers, and promised to do all she asked. Then, as dawn drew near, he vanished from his wife's embrace. Psyche's sisters inquired about the location of the rock on which she had been abandoned, and they quickly made their way to it. There they cried their eyes out and beat their breasts until the rocks and crags echoed equally loudly with their repeated lamentations. Then they sought to conjure up their sister by summoning her by name, until the piercing notes of their wailing voices permeated down the mountainside, and Psyche rushed frantically and fearfully from the house. "Why," she asked, "do you torture yourselves to no purpose with your unhappy cries of grief? Here I am, the object of your mourning, so cease your doleful cries, and now at last dry those cheeks which are wet with prolonged tears, for you can now hug close the sister for whom you grieved." She then summoned the Zephyr and reminded him of her husband's instructions. He speedily obeyed the command, and at once whisked them down safely on the gentlest of breezes. The sisters embraced each other and delightedly exchanged eager kisses. The tears which had been dried welled forth again, prompted by their joy. "Now that you are in good spirits," said Psyche, "you must enter my hearth and home, and let the company of your Psyche gladden your heart that were troubled." Following these words, she showed them the magnificent riches of the golden house, and let them hear the voices of her large retinue. She then allowed them the rich pleasure of a luxurious bath and an elegant meal served by her ghostly maids. But when they had had their fill of the copious abundance of riches clearly bestowed by heavens, they began to harbor deep-seated envy in their hearts. So one of them kept asking with nagging curiosity about the owner of those divine possessions, about the identity and status of her husband. Psyche, in her heart's depths, did not in any way disobey or disregard her husband's instructions. She invented an impromptu story that he was a handsome young man whose cheeks were just darkening with a soft beard, and who spent most of his day hunting in the hills of the countryside. But she was anxious not to betray, through a slip of the tongue, her silent resolve by continuing the conversation, so she weighed her sisters down with gold artifacts and precious jewels, hastily summoning the Zephyr and entrusting them to him for the return journey. This was carried out at once, and those splendid sisters then made their way home. They were now gnawed with the bile of growing envy, and repeatedly exchanged loud-voiced complaints. One of them began, "Fortune, how blind and harsh and unjust you are! Was it your pleasure that we daughters of the same parents should endure so different a fate? Here we are, her elder sisters, nothing better than maidservants to foreign husbands, banished from home and even from our native land, living like exiles, far from our parents, while Psyche, the youngest and last offspring of our mother's weary womb, has obtained all this wealth and a god for a husband. She has not even a notion of how to enjoy such abundant blessings. Did you notice, sisters, the quantity and quality of the precious stones lying in the house, the gleaming garments, the sparkling jewels, the gold lying beneath our feet, all over the house? If she also has as a husband a handsome man, as she claims, no woman living in the whole world is more blessed. Perhaps as their intimacy continues and their love grows stronger, her god husband will make her divine as well. That's how things are, mark my words. She was putting on such airs and graces. She's now so high and mighty, behaving like a goddess, with those voices serving her needs and winds obeying her commands, whereas my life's a hell. To begin with, I have a husband older than my father. He's balder than an onion as well, and he hasn't the virility of an infant, and he keeps our house barricaded with bars and chains." The other took up the grumbling. "I have to put up with a husband crippled and bent with rheumatism, so that he can succumb to my charms only once in a blue moon. I spend almost all my day rubbing his fingers, which are twisted and hard as flint, and burning these soft hands of mine on wrecking poultices, filthy bandages, and smelly plasters. I'm a slaving nursing attendant, not a dutiful wife. You must decide for yourself, sister, how patiently, or let me express myself frankly, how menially you intend to bear this situation. I can't brook any longer the thought of this undeserving girl falling on her feet like this. Just recall how disdainfully and haughtily she treated us, how swollen-headed she'd become with her boasting and her immodest and vulgar display, how she reluctantly threw at us a few trinkets from that mass of riches, and then at once ordered us to be thrown out, whisked away, sent off with the wind because she found our presence tedious. As sure as I'm a woman, as sure as I'm standing here, I'm going to propel her headlong off that heap of riches. If the insulting way she's treated us has needled you as well, as it certainly should have, we must work out an effective plan together. We must not show the gifts in our possession to our parents or anyone else. We must not even betray the slightest awareness that she's alive. It's bad enough that we've witnessed the sorry situation ourselves without our having to spread the glad news to our parents and the world at large. People aren't really fortunate if no one knows of their riches. She'll realize that she's got elder sisters, not maidservants. So let us now go back to our husbands and homes, which may be poor but are honest. Then, when we have given the matter deeper thought, we must go back more determined to punish her arrogance. The two wicked sisters approved this wicked plan, so they hid away all those most valuable gifts. They tore their hair, gave their cheeks the scratching they deserved, and feigned renewed grief. Their hasty summoned tears depressed their parents, reawakening their sorrow to match that of their daughters, and then, swollen with lunatic rage, they rushed off to their homes, planning their wicked wiles, or rather the assassination of their innocent sister. Meanwhile, Psyche's unknown husband, in their nightly conversations, again counseled her with these words: "Are you aware that what immense danger hangs over you? Fortune is aiming her darts at you from long range, and unless you take the most stringent precautions, she will soon engage with you hand to hand. Those traitorous bitches are straining every nerve to lay wicked traps for you. Above all, they are seeking to persuade you to pry into my appearance, and as I have often warned you, a single glimpse of it will be at your loss. So, if those depraved witches turn up later ready with their destructive designs, and I am sure they will, you must not exchange a single word with them, or at any rate, if your naive innocence and soft-heartedness cannot bear that, you are not to listen to or utter a single word about your husband. Soon we shall be starting a family, for this as yet tiny womb of yours is carrying for us another child like yourself. If you conceal our secret in silence, that child will be a god, but if you disclose it, he will be mortal." Psyche was aglow with delight at the news. She gloried in the comforting prospect of a divine child. She exulted in the fame that such a dear one would bring her, and she rejoiced at the thought of the respected status of mother. She eagerly counted the mounting days and departing months, and as a novice bearing an unknown burden, she marveled that the pin-prick of a moment would cause such a lovely swelling in her fecund womb. But now those baneful, most abhorrent Furies were hastening on their impious way aboard ship, exhaling their snake-like poison. It was then that Psyche's husband on his brief visit again warned her, "This is the day of crisis, the moment of worst hazard. Those troublesome members of your sex, those hostile blood relations of yours, have now seized their arms, struck camp, drawn their battle line, and sounded the trumpet note. Your impious sisters have drawn their sword and are aiming for your jugular. The calamities that oppress us are indeed direful, dearest Psyche. Take pity on yourself and on me. Show dutiful self-control to deliver your house and your husband, your person and this tiny child of ours, from the unhappy disaster that looms over us. Do not set eyes on or open your ears to these female criminals whom you cannot call your sisters because of their deadly hatred and because of the way in which they have trodden under foot their own flesh and blood, when like sirens they lean out over the crag and make the rocks resound with their death-dealing cries." Psyche's response was muffled with tearful sobs. "Some time ago I think you had proof of my trustworthiness and discretion, and on this occasion, too, my resolution will likewise win your approval. Only tell our Zephyr to provide his service again, and allow me at least a glimpse of my sisters as consolation for your unwillingness to let me gaze on your sacred face. I beg you by these locks of yours, which with their scent of cinnamon dangle all around your head, by your cheeks as soft and smooth as my own, by your breast which diffuses its hidden heat, as I hope to observe your features, as reflected at least in this our tiny child, accede to the devoted prayers of this careworn suppliant, and grant me the blessing of my sister's embraces. Then you will give fresh life and joy to your Psyche, your own devoted and dedicated dear one. I no longer seek to see your face. The very darkness of the night is not oppressive to me, for you are my light, to which I cling." Her husband was bewitched by these words and soft embraces. He wiped away her tears with his curls, promised to do her bidding, and at once departed before dawn broke. The conspiratorial pair of sisters did not even call on their parents. At breakneck speed they made straight from the ships to the familiar rock, and without waiting for the presence of the wafting wind, launched themselves down with impudent rashness into the depths below. The Zephyr, somewhat unwillingly recalling his king's command, enfolded them in the bosom of his favoring breeze, and set them down on solid earth. Without hesitation they at once marched with measured step into the house, and, counterfeiting the name of sisters, they embraced their prey. With joyful expressions they cloaked the deeply hidden deceit which they treasured within them, and flattered their sister with these words: "Psyche, you are no longer the little girl of old. You are now a mother. Just imagine what a blessing you bear in that purse of yours. What pleasures you will bring to your whole family. How lucky we are at the prospect of rearing the prince of infants. If he is as handsome as his parents, and why not? He is sure to be a thorough Cupid." With this pretense of affection they gradually wormed their way into their sister's heart. As soon as they had rested their feet to recover from the weariness of the journey, and had steeped their bodies in a steaming bath, Psyche served them in the dining-room with a most handsome and delightful meal of meats and savories. She ordered a lyre to play, and string music came forth. She ordered pipes to start up, and their notes were heard. She bade choirs to sing, and they duly did. All this music soothed their spirits with the sweetest tunes as they listened, though no human person stood before them. But those baleful sisters were not softened or lulled even by that music so honey-sweet. They guided the conversation toward the deceitful snare which they had laid, and they began to inquire innocently about the status, family background, and walk of life of her husband. Then Psyche's excessive naivety made her forget her earlier version, and she concocted a fresh story. She said that her husband was a businessman from an adjoining region, and that he was middle-aged with streaks of gray in his hair. But she did not linger a moment longer in such talk, but again loaded her sisters with rich gifts, and ushered them back to their carriage of the wind. But as they returned home, after the Zephyr with his serene breath had borne them aloft, they exchanged abusive comments about Psyche. "There are no words, sister, to describe the outrageous lie of that idiotic girl. Previously her husband was a young fellow whose beard was beginning to sprout with woolly growth, but now he's in middle age with spruce and shining gray hair. What a prodigy he must be! This short interval has brought an old age abruptly and has changed his appearance. How you can be sure, sister, that this noxious female is either telling a pack of lies or does not know what her husband is like. Whatever the truth of the matter, she must be parted from those riches of hers without delay. If she does not know what her husband looks like, she must certainly be married to a god, and it is a god she's got for us in that womb of hers. Be sure of this, that if she becomes a celebrity as the mother of a divine child, which God forbid, I'll put a rope round my neck and hang myself. For the moment, then, let us go back to our parents and spin a fairy story to match the one we concocted at first." In this impassioned state they greeted their parents disdainfully, and after a restless night those despicable sisters sped to the rock at break of day. They threw themselves down through the air, and the wind afforded them his usual protection. They squeezed their eyelids to force out some tears, and greeted the girl with these guileful words: "While you sit here content and in happy ignorance of your grim situation, giving no thought to your danger, we in our watchful zeal for your welfare lie awake at night, racked with sadness for your misfortune. We know for a fact, and as we share your painful plight we cannot hide it from you, that a monstrous dragon lies unseen with you at night. It creeps along with its numerous knotted coils. Its neck is blood-stained and oozes deadly poisons. Its monstrous jaws lie gaping open. You must surely remember the Pythian oracle and its chant that you were doomed to wed a wild beast. Then, too, many farmers, local huntsmen, and a number of inhabitants have seen the dragon returning to its lair at night after seeking its food or swimming in the shallows of a river close by. All of them maintain that the beast will not continue to fatten you for long by providing you with enticing food, and that as soon as your womb has filled out and your pregnancy comes to term, it will devour the richer fare which you will then offer. In view of this, you must now decide whether you are willing to side with your sisters, who are anxious for your welfare, which is so dear to our hearts, and to live in their company once you escape from death, or whether you prefer to be interred in the stomach of that fiercest of beasts. However, if you opt for the isolation of this rustic haunt inhabited only by voices, preferring the foul and hazardous intimacy of furtive love in the embrace of this venomous dragon, at any rate, we as your devoted sisters will have done our duty." Poor Psyche, simple and innocent as she was, at once felt apprehension at these grim tidings. She lost her head and completely banished her recollection of all her husband's warnings and her own promises. She launched herself into an abyss of disaster. Trembling and pale as the blood drained from her face, she barely opened her mouth as she gasped and stammered out this reply to them: "Dearest sisters, you have acted rightly in continuing to observe your devoted duty. And as for those who make these assertions to you, I do not think that they are telling lies. It is true that I have never seen my husband's face, and I have no knowledge whatsoever of where he hails from. I merely attend at night to the words of a husband, to whom I submit with no knowledge of what he is like, for he certainly shuns the light of day. Your judgment is just that he is some beast, and I rightly agree with you. He constantly and emphatically warns me against seeing what he looks like, and threatens me with great disaster if I show curiosity about his features. So, if at this moment you can offer saving help to your sister in her hour of danger, you must come to my rescue now. Otherwise, your indifference to the future will tarnish the benefits of your previous concern." Those female criminals had now made their way through the open gates and had occupied the mind of their sister thus exposed. They emerged from beneath the mantlet of their battering rams, drew their swords, and advanced on the terrified thoughts of that simple girl. So it was that one of them said to her, "Our family ties compel us, in the interest of your safety, to disregard any danger whatsoever which lies before us, so we shall inform you of the one way by which you will attain the safety which has exercised us for so long. You must wet a razor by running it over your softening palm, and when it is quite sharp, hide it secretly by the bed where you usually lie. Then fill a well-trimmed lamp with oil, and when it is shining brightly, conceal it beneath the cover of an enclosing jar. Once you have purposely secreted this equipment, You must wait until your husband plows his furrow and enters and climbs as usual into bed. Then, when he has stretched out and sleep has begun to oppress and enfold him, as soon as he starts the steady breathing which denotes deep sleep, you must slip off the couch in your bare feet and on tiptoe take mincing steps forward and remove the lamp from its protective cover of darkness. Then take your cue from the lamp and seize the moment to perform your own shining deed. Grasp the two-edged weapon boldly. First raise high your right hand, and then with all the force you can muster, sever the knot which joins the neck and head of that venomous serpent. You will not act without our help, for we shall be hovering anxiously in attendance, and as soon as you have ensured your safety by his death, we shall fly to your side. All these riches here we shall bear off with you with all speed, and then we shall arrange an enviable marriage for you, human being with human being." Their sister was already quite feverish with agitation, but these fiery words set her heart ablaze. At once they left her, for their proximity to this most wicked crime made them fear greatly for themselves. So the customary thrust of the winged breeze bore them up to the rock, and they at once fled to precipitate haste. Without delay they embarked on their ships and cast off. But Psyche, now left alone, except that being harried by the hostile furies was no solitude, tossed in her grief like the waves of the sea. Though her plan was formed and her determination fixed, she still faltered in uncertainty of purpose as she set her hands to action, and was torn between the many impulses of her unhappy plight. She made haste, she temporized, her daring turned to fear, her diffidence to anger, and to cap everything, she loathed the beast, but loved the husband, though they were one and the same. But now evening brought on darkness, so with headlong haste she prepared the instruments for the heinous crime. Night fell, and her husband arrived, and having first skirmished in the warfare of love, he fell into a heavy sleep. Then Psyche, though enfeebled in both body and mind, gained the strength lent her by fate's harsh decree. She uncovered the lamp, seized the razor, and showed a boldness that belied her sex. But as soon as the lamp was brought near and the secrets of the couch were revealed, she beheld of all beasts the gentlest and sweetest, Cupid himself, a handsome god lying in a handsome posture. Even the lamplight was cheered and brightened on sighting him, and the razor felt suitably abashed at its sacrilegious sharpness. As for Psyche, she was awestruck at this wondrous vision, and she lost all self-control. She swooned and paled with enervation. Her knees buckled, and she sought to hide the steel by plunging it into her own breast. Indeed, she would have perpetrated this, but the steel showed its fear of committing so serious a crime by plunging out of her rash grasp. But, as in her weariness and giddiness she gazed repeatedly on the beauty of that divine countenance, her mental balance was restored. She beheld on his golden head his luxuriant hair steeped in ambrosia, his nearly pinned ringlets straight over his milk-white neck, and rosy cheeks, some dangling in front and some behind. Their surpassing sheen made even the lamplight flicker. On the winged god's shoulders his dewy wings gleamed white with flashing brilliance, though they lay motionless. The soft and fragile feathers at their tips fluttered in quivering motion and sported restlessly. The rest of his body, hairless and rosy, was such that Venus would not have been ashamed to acknowledge him as her son. At the foot of the bed lay his bow, quiver, and arrows, the kindly weapons of that great god. As Psyche trained her gaze insatiably and with no little curiosity on these her husband's weapons, in the course of handling and admiring them, she drew out an arrow from the quiver and tested its point on the tip of her thumb. But because her arm was still trembling, she pressed too hard, with the result that it pricked too deeply, and tiny drops of rose-red blood bedewed the surface of the skin. So, all-knowing and without prompting, Psyche fell in love with love, being fired more and more with desire for the god of desire. She gazed down at him in distraction, and as she passionately smothered him with wanton kisses from parted lips, she feared that he might stir in his sleep. But while Her wounded heart pounded on, being roused by such striking beauty. The lamp disgorged a drop of burning oil from the tip of its flame upon the god's right shoulder. It could have been nefarious treachery, or malicious jealousy, or the desire to touch and kiss that glorious body. O you rash, reckless lamp, love's worthless servant, do you burn the very God who possesses all fire? Though doubtless you were invented by some lover to ensure that he might possess for longer and even at night the object of his desire. The god started up on being burnt. He saw that he was exposed and that his trust was defiled. Without a word, he at once flew away from the kisses and embraces of his most unhappy wife.